Here at Seattle Atheist Church, the members ourselves give the majority of the talks. We have a planning meeting every quarter. It's open to the whole community, which means everyone who's here, you are welcome to be part of that, where we talk about talks we like to hear and give. Today, join me in welcoming Bruce, who will give a talk about the phases of groups. Thank you, Bruce. I'm looking forward to this.
Okay. This is a really wonderful subject. What I want to do is give you a little bit of background. Then I will talk to you about the 5 stages of groups, and then we'll talk about some qualifications to the stages at the end. So first thing is, my talk today is based on a book called Group Dynamics. The author is someone named Donaldson Forsyth, Forsyth. This guy is a wonderful writer. When I was teaching group dynamics, this was like, I've used this book for years. He's not academic in the way he writes. He's not dry as dust, and it's a wonderful book. So really, when I talk about phases of groups, it's pretty easy when we think about individual development to think about when a person is 2 years old. Psychologists will make predictions about what 2-year-olds are most likely to do because they're 2 years old. The same developmental psychologists might say, when somebody is 16 years old, there's a range of predictable ways that they're going to be. And they will say, you know, a 10-year-old will not act like a 16-year-old, and a 22-year-old will not act like a 16-year-old. They will also say that when people reach their late 30s, things happen that are relatively predictable. So the question that I have always been interested in, and this book, it really gives the answers, is do groups go through any kind of predictable stages, like equivalent to individual development? Like, is there a stage, a beginning stage, a middle stage, and an end stage of groups when predictable things are more likely to happen? And from this research, the answer is definitely there are predictable phases that groups go through. Now, 2 things about the setting. When we talk about groups, the phases of groups will work best under these conditions. One is that it's what's called an organic group. Okay, an organic group means that there is like a division of labor within the group, so people know what other people are supposed to be doing. So like a band will have musicians that will play different instruments. They each have a role. A baseball team or a football team has positions. So the group has to have some kind of division of labor where people are doing work. Second thing is the group has to have a predictable ending time. It's much easier to test group development if the group knows it's going to end at a particular time. If it's more open-ended, it's less easy to predict what's going to happen. The third thing about a group that's subject to these phases is that the group is closed. It's very hard to test a group if people come in and out of the group, and in any given week, you don't know who is going to be in it. That won't lend itself easily to test group development. And then the 4th characteristic is that the group has to meet on a regular basis, whether it's once a week, it's once every 2 weeks. There has to be some regularity in the meetings. So to just review, the group has to have a division of labor. The group has to have a definite ending time. The group has to be relatively closed, and there needs to be a regular frequency of meetings. Okay. So what I'm going to give you for my example is, I think I've mentioned this to you before, and if I have, I hope this is not like home movies for you, but I used to work, I spent 2 years working for an organization called Men Overcoming Violence. It was a 40-week program for men who had battered their partners, and we had 2 counselors, and the program was a 40-week program. We met once a week on a Saturday for 2 hours. The purpose of our group was to teach men nonviolent communication skills so they don't beat up their partner. Most of the people in the group did not want to be there. It was a choice of being in our group or going to jail. So we did not have people that ideally just wanted to come there. It were people that were kind of had their backs against the wall. The size of the group was generally between about 12 and 15 people in the group. I would say class-wise, it's mostly working class. We had a couple of middle-class people now and then. And the groups were very mixed racially. So I'm telling you this because when I tell you about the 5 stages, this Men Overcoming Violence group will be sort of the group that I'll be referring to as going through these stages. Okay, does that make sense to people? Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you right off what the 5 stages are so you have the big picture. And then what I'll do is fill in some of the most common, maybe 4 or 5 things that happen in each of the phases. Okay, so the 5 stages, and they put them together in a kind of rhyming form so they're easy to remember. The first phase of a group is called the forming stage, Forming. The second stage is the storming stage, like a storm. The third stage is conforming. The fourth stage is performing. And the fifth stage is adjourning. Okay, so forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the characteristics of these phases, each of these phases, and then at the end of it, I'll qualify what I'm saying with some of the things that you might think I'm saying that I'm really not saying. A lot of the qualifications at the end are more like saying it's not as simple as the way I'm presenting it, right? So the way I usually like to present things is kind of like starkly, kind of like black and white. And then when we finish and talk about the qualifications, we'll talk about the color, the exceptions to the rule, that kind of stuff. Okay, so when most of the people, probably all the people in our group had no idea that there were phases of groups. I mean, they just came to the group. They had no idea that there was any kind of a developmental process. We never talked to them about that because that wasn't our job. But what the book and what my experience has described is at the forming stage, usually what happens are that people are anxious over the unknown. In other words, they come into the group, they don't really know what the ground rules are, they don't know what the structure is, they don't know anything about power dynamics. So they come in and they're nervous, right? It's not nervous like, you're neurotic, it's nervous because it's the unknown, you don't know, it's perfectly normal. So the kind of questions people have in the forming stage that they often don't articulate are things like, questions about other people in the group. One of the things is people want to know, are the authority figures competent? Do they know what they're doing? In terms of other group members, people want to get a sense that other group members are not scary, that it's relatively safe, that they can trust other members, because in this group, you know, what you would be doing is when you have an incident with your partner, like you were violent with your partner, you have to report it. And then we talk about it in the group, and then we talk about, okay, how could you do it better? That's not an easy thing to do in front of a bunch of strangers. So there's a sense in which people look around and they have a sense of how well can I trust other people? So it's the other people in the group and the authorities that's a concern for people to be nervous about. The third thing that happens in the first phase is that subgroups usually form, and they usually form around people's appearance. So what people will do, like if we have 12 or 15 people, and people have a choice about where they're going to sit, they're going to look for people that look like them and sit with them. So the criteria is, what do the people look like? And again, this is not something that people consciously are thinking about. It's just something that people do, because people make the assumption that people that look like them are relatively safe. So it will be things like ethnicity, gender, age. People will try to find people that are closer to them, and they'll stay away from people that are less closer to them than those characteristics. The next thing that happens is people will try to bind around commonalities, not differences. So people will try to find commonalities that will allow them to build some structure and some safety. So in our group, because it was not because it was, but it was an all male group. Okay, so there were no women in the group. A lot of these guys would bond around sports. So they would talk about, how did the team do? So this was San Francisco. So we would talk about how the Giants did or the A's did, if it was baseball, or it was the Raiders or the 49ers in football. And that was a way for people to sort of, you know, feel a little bit more safe. People will generally stay away from controversies in the forming stage. In other words, people will not talk about politics and religion with people that are sitting next to them, because it's too potentially explosive. So people will talk about, especially, you know, if the weather is bad, people will talk about the weather. Of course, in the Bay Area, as some of you know, I mean, having lived in the Bay Area, there's no real weather in San Francisco and Oakland compared to places like where we live now. But if the weather can be talked about, people will talk about it. So I would say in our 40-week program, I would say that the forming stage would probably last maybe about 3 weeks. So it would be 3 2-week meetings. 3 meetings of 2 weeks each, while all these forming processes would be in place. Okay, the second of 5 stages is the storming stage. Now, this is a stage where there's polarization and coalition formation. And that's based on what people say and what people do, okay? So what I'd like you to pay attention to is that in the first forming stage, people join together based on what people look like. In the second stage, people will identify differences between them, but the differences will be more substantial. It won't be what do people look like, but it's more like what do people say or what do people do. So, for example, one of the things that we would do, which was a very regular and powerful exercise, is we would do role plays, and we'd break people up into groups of 4 or 5, groups of 3. Each, one person would role play the partner. One person would be the person that did the offense, and then the other person would watch the interaction and take notes. Well, in these small groups, what you would find is that people are moved by what other people say, they're moved by other people's struggles. And so what will happen is, as a result of these small groups, people will find themselves sitting next to people that they identified with or felt sympathy for based on how people did the exercise. So it was like there was another kind of solidity that got formed that was really based on something deeper than people's appearances. But people did break up into different groups and form little subgroups based on these new characteristics. At the storming stage, there's a testing of differences. So people will challenge each other a little bit. They'll object to what other people say. And it's like a testing ground to see, and this is also for the leaders, can the leaders handle conflict? And if the leaders appear to not handle conflict, the group becomes very unsafe. So there have to be some kind of challenges in this stage, because if the group is going to develop, it has to accept that people do not agree, and that possibly through the disagreement, something new and something better can happen. But the group has to tolerate differences. In the second stage, there's also competition over tasks and roles. In groups that have different role positions, people will challenge each other about how well they're playing a certain role, because they're still trying to get stable about what roles each person is supposed to play. In these type of groups, there can also be disagreements over substantial questions, like some people will challenge some of the exercise we give them and say, well, why can't we do it this way, or why can't we do it that way? And they'll challenge each other about things they say or the things they do. And this is, in my judgment, this is the most important stage, because if people can tolerate differences and work with the differences and try to create some kind of a synthesis over what people are saying, the group really has a chance to develop. If they can't do this, it will weaken the different stages later on, because people have not faced this problem. Okay, there's a lot more to say about the storming stage, but I want to make sure that I stay on track in terms of my time. But I think that's enough for you to get, this is kind of what's going to happen here. The third stage, the norming stage, is the stage, a good way to describe this is in the first 2 stages, the forming and the storming stage. When a person comes home from this group, if their partner says to them, well, how did the group go? They will answer like this: the group did this, the group did that. In other words, it'll all be kind of third person. When the group reaches the norming stage, there's a feeling of solidarity within the group. so that when the person comes back from this group and somebody says to them, well, how did the group go? They'll say, we did this, we did that. There'll be a sense that you're in this together. So the norming stage is not just like conforming. It's like, it's recognizing we really have a common project here. There's relative agreement about the direction of the group. There's a relative trust of the leadership. There's a relative trust of most of the other people in the group. Not everybody trusts everybody, but usually by maybe, I would say, maybe 10 weeks in, people will trust people, most of the other people. People will also have a rhythm because they will have been coming every single week, every single Saturday for a couple of hours. So they kind of have a sense of, okay, I know what's happening here. I know what my place is. I know what the rules are. I know who I trust. I know who I'm a little suspicious of, but I'm part of this. I'm part of something. There's an increased sense of security in this group and less uncertainty. But there is also an increased pressure in conforming because when people have a sense of this is my group, we're in this together. It might be harder to disagree with people once you're in this stage because it's comfortable and people are more likely to say, let's not rock the boat. Whereas in the storming stage, people will feel like, I don't know if I really am in this group, I'm really part of it. So who cares if I say something outlandish? Because, I'm not sure this is even my group. Now, most of the guys will stay in the group because they don't want to go to jail. But a lot of people will sort of be distant in the group and not feel like they're really part of it. In the norming stage, they do feel part of it. And so there'll be a sense of not really wanting to rock the boat as much by challenging people. Okay. Now, the fourth stage of the group is called the performing stage. The activities that go on here are problem solving, decision making, problem finding. So these are the things that people are supposed to be doing in the group. That's part of their job. Now, probably being skeptical or quizzical about all this, you might say to yourself, well, how can you go through 3 stages before people are performing? The answer to that is that people are performing right away. Okay, people are performing even in the first stage, in the stage of the forming. The reason it's not called performing is because people are still learning the tools. So we can have in week 2, where they're in the forming stage, we can have somebody that has an incident, and then we teach them the 5 steps of nonverbal communication, and we tell them to get in a role play and practice those and practice saying something to your partner and using these steps. Well, they do it. They don't do such a hot job because they don't understand it. And they keep doing these practicing things through the forming, through the storming, through the conforming. But at the performing stage, they're good at it. So by the performing stage, which might be, depending on the group, it might be 15 or 20 weeks in, they understand the steps of nonverbal communication. They understand how to do the role play. They understand a lot of what we're trying to do in the group, and they're simply performing it, and they're doing it pretty well. And if they're doing it very well, then they're not even doing it in the group much anymore. Where they're doing it is with their partner at home, right? And we can't see that. But the ultimate test for performing is where you take it out of our center and do it in your home. And that becomes the solution to the violent behavior, because you're practicing what we've taught you. So, you know, I'm using one particular group, but any group that has the characteristics that I gave you at the beginning, the 4 types, will go through a similar process where people understand what's going on in the group, they understand their roles, and they're performing their job efficiently to where it's cooking, it's running. Let's see. Okay. Now, the last stage, the adjourning stage, is pretty interesting. I'm just going to name some of the characteristics of it, and then I'm going to tell you how some of the guys in our program dealt with this. The adjourning stage is saying goodbye. This group is 40 weeks. At the end of 40 weeks, that's it, and people leave. So usually when people are leaving a group, there's usually a set of emotional reactions like disappointment that the group is over, hurt that the group is over, sadness that the group is over, anger, relief, joy. These are all part of the kind of stuff that you see. Now, the couple of things that happen when things go well is that people can verbalize their emotional life and their sadness or whatever it is about the group ending. The guys in our program, some of them did this well, most of them did not, and I'll tell you why. Oftentimes at the end of a group, there'll be a reduction of interdependency, which means that people will be letting go of the roles that they're in, and people will ask themselves questions like, so where are you going to go? What's your next step? What are you going to do? But then there's also at the same time a reflective stage. The group talks about their past. The group says, remember when this happened? Remember when that happened? Remember when the leader was late and people were upset, and so there's like a combination of reminiscing on the one hand at the end of the group about the group in the past, and then projection about what each individual is going to do in this group when the group ends. Now, one of the things you can do if you don't like endings is you can do things like this. You can be absent in the last group meeting, so you don't have to deal with saying goodbye. You can pick a fight to create distance. You can act incompetent so the group will continue. You can make efforts to prolong the group to avoid the emotions. One of the things that we did is we started talking about the group ending 4 weeks before the group ends. So week 36, we would say to the guys, so the group is ending in 4 weeks. How do you feel about the group ending? And they say stuff like, good. I want to be able to sleep in on Saturday mornings. Or they make jokes and say, oh, this stupid group, I'm glad it's finally over, right? Undeterred, the following week, we would say, hey, everyone, the group's going to be just 3 weeks, and we're out of here. The group's going to end. Anybody want to say anything about that? And maybe there'll be a little more joking, but the people that are probably the boldest and understand the most about the groups will say something about that they're going to miss the group. Some people are scared because they're afraid without the group structure that they'll have another incident or they'll regress. And they'll realize that, well, when you have something 40 weeks, 2 hours once a week, and it's not there, you lost a lot of structure. So what are you going to do to replace it? And some of the guys, interestingly, and this was fairly predictable, that there would be a couple of people that had no incidents for, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Suddenly, 2 weeks before the end, we find out that somebody's had an incident. I've been violent. So some of the things that happen is people don't want the group to end, and so they do something to allow them to stay in the group. So if we have another 40-week group coming on in back of this, they'll say, well, can I be in that group? I'm not ready to leave. So sometimes people will do something self-destructive at the end so that they can stay on. So something that I used to do, this is my last point, and then I'll go into the qualifications. I used to tell them a story about a group of guys that I used to play football with. And we used to play football together every Saturday, no matter what the weather was. And we did this together for about maybe 7 years. And I got very close to these guys. And this was at a time in my life when I was not a good student. I didn't care much about anything, but I was good. I was a good football player. And that was kind of my whole world. And when we got to be about 17 or 18, of course, people move away. People go to the military, people go to jail, people go to college. And the group broke up. And I never was able to say goodbye to those folks. They were very meaningful to me. I never sat down with them and said, I'm going to miss you. So I would tell the people in the group this so that I would say to them, so if you've got something to say to people, say it now about how much you care about them or whatever, because really you're not going to see these folks again. This is it. And then people would step up. And people would be, not everybody, but some of the people would step up and be emotional and would catch fire. And most of the time it was a good ending. So there you have it. Those are the 5 stages of groups. What I want to close with is some qualifications. And this will be very quick. This will be just a couple of minutes. One thing is that the 5 stages, the first qualification is the 5 stages aren't linear, okay? What that means is you don't go through each stage as if it had nothing to do with the other stages. Really, all the stages are kind of embedded in each stage. So there's there's overlap so that even when you're in the forming stage, there is some degree of storming and conforming that's going on there too. So the stages are kind of overlapping and they're not like separate little cookie colors. The second qualification is that there's something that Stephen Jay Gould called, when he did his stuff on evolution, called punctuated equilibrium. The group doesn't go through the stages evenly, gradually, smoothly. Groups can be stuck for a while where it seems like nothing happens. And then there's like some kind of incident. And if it's a good incident, it mobilizes people. And then people kind of make jumps. And all of a sudden, in the space of 2 weeks, the group is really functioning highly. Whereas 2 weeks ago, it was flat. So punctuated equilibrium just means it's lumpy and it's uneven sometimes. It's not smooth. The third qualification is not all groups go through these 5 phases, right? Some groups don't have an adjourning stage, and some groups get stuck at one of these stages and they never get out. So going through these 5 stages means that the group has a chance to develop. Some groups don't go through all the stages, and that's, you know, that's normal stuff. Going through the 5 stages does not mean the group has developed. I call my talk phases, not stages, because to say that a group has, stages mean development, maturation. You need a bunch of other characteristics before you can measure whether a group is developed or not. So having gone through these phases does not necessarily mean the group is more mature at the end. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. So there you have it. Love to hear what you have to say about this and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Bruce. Can everyone unmute yourselves for a moment and give a round of applause?